Please be seated. In the name of the main character, and of its harem, and of the holy waifu, Kawaii Esu. This is the Radical Rant Podcast. Hello everybody, hope you are seated, have your sacred dakimakuras, your figurines, and all that sweet waifu material, and welcome one and all, to the inaugural episode of the Church of Weeb, also known as the Radical Rant Anime Podcast, but I couldn't think of a better name for it, and the Church of Weeb is what's sticking. Long story short, it's a weird joke that has kind of just developed over the last little while. So I play on PlayStation, I play Minecraft with a bunch of friends, and we usually use it as just a random social tool, and they all know that I'm a massive weeboo. I don't hide it. It's pretty obvious. So one guy one day was like, man, like, it's almost like you're religious with how you talk about anime. Maybe you should have like a Church of Weeb or something. And I didn't think anything of it till the next day. We got back on the server again, and I just got bored and built a church, and then started just making up like a good chunk of, what was it? I think it was like the original bit of Genesis, like whatever, I think it is Genesis, where it's like in the beginning there was this and blah blah blah, and I just replaced a lot of stuff with anime and hentai and all that stuff. It was a fun little joke. And for whatever reason, the Church of Weeb name is just kind of stuck. I was trying to think of a name for this podcast, and nothing was working. At least nothing that wouldn't sound like too cliche or wouldn't be that, I guess, different or unique. So this is the one that just kind of stuck, and we'll see how it goes from here. So the Church of Weeb is going to be a tri-weekly podcast. That's every 3 weeks. Or in the case of one specific podcast, every 3 weeks, there's going to be probably a 4-week gap, because what this podcast is going to be for is for all the simulcasted anime that I watch. So we are currently 3 weeks into the season, and some of these shows are 4 or 5, but we're talking about 1 to 3 for the shows that I am still watching at this point. So every podcast will be a certain point in the season. So this podcast is our first impressions, basically. We'll obviously have one at episode 6, which is the midway point. We'll have one at 9, which is getting ready to close out to where the finale is going to be. And then episode 12 or 13, or wherever the hell it ends, or in the case of like a episode 25, like we just keep talking about it like it's not a finale, but that's the idea, is for every 3 weeks essentially to have a podcast that reviews everything that I've watched. Now, to set some ground rules here, it is just me on this podcast still. So with that in mind, remember, I don't watch everything. In this case, this season I'm only watching 8 shows right now, and I'm only talking about shows that I have made it to episode 3. So if I drop the show after episode 1 or 2, I'm not talking about it here because it's kind of a waste, because I'm not ever going to talk about it again. I want this to be a progressional thing. And in the most of the cases of the shows that I usually drop, they are usually episode 1s. I mostly don't finish them, and what am I really going to tell you other than I didn't like it? I can't really go that in depth of why I don't like it. It's either not for me, I think it's absolute just pure trash, like stuff like that. It's not worth spending time on. I would rather spend more of this podcast just talking about the things that I am liking, or at the very least, am into enough that I still want to keep going by the time this podcast airs. So, with that being said, we are going to go through the 8 shows that I am currently watching here in the summer season. This will be in alphabetical order. There is no real order to things here. And, it's just going to be one of those things where it's like, all right, we'll just keep going as we go with it. And, hopefully in 3 weeks we will be in the same spot, and we will continue to talk about all 8 shows 3 weeks from now, and hopefully they'll still be in good shape. But for that time being, we'll see how it goes. So right off the bat, let's start with Are You Lost? And I'm speaking all of these based on what the English versions are, or at least what Crunchyroll puts on. By the way, I didn't mention that before. All the shows that I watch right now at this very given point is exclusively on Crunchyroll. It's the one service I use. I know people are like, well, this is on Netflix, this is on Prime Video, this is on this other service, or in some cases they're on nothing so people illegally get them. I don't want to get things illegally, and I cannot justify spending money on another service when I'm only going to watch it for 2 shows. Crunchyroll has always made sense for me. I can't justify Netflix because I don't have time to watch all that stuff. And then in the case of Prime Video, I mean, I have Prime Video, but I don't really use it that much. It's mostly Prime that I have, and that's what I'm using it for. So at this point in time, I'm at Crunchyroll, and that's where all my shows are coming from. So if you're wondering why some shows are not here, it's because they're not on Crunchyroll, and that's where all my anime watching is coming from right now. Because, again, I don't want to go out and have like 4 different services to watch stuff, and my time is limited that it kind of works out this way anyway, because Crunchy, generally speaking, gives me anywhere between 6 to 10, maybe sometimes even 12 shows by the end of a season, and that's about the range that I can handle, so it just works out nicely that way. So anyway, like I said, Are You Lost is the first one we're going to start with here. For those, and again, actually I should kind of preface this podcast will be non-spoiler, or at least as non-spoiler as I can make it. Once we get to the following podcasts, it's going to be expected that if you're listening to this specific one, you will be going in with spoilers in there. And I will try to timestamp when the following podcasts come. I'll try to do it here as well, but I'll try to timestamp everything so that way if there's a show that you don't know what's going on yet and you haven't got to that point yet and you don't want to be spoiled, you can skip ahead. But this specific podcast as a first impressions is probably going to be less about spoilers and more like, hey, this is something that maybe you should look into. Whereas if we get to the midway points, and especially when we get to the finales, like, what are you going to talk about the finales other than the spoilers? So just be warned of that. But this is going to be the non-spoiler edition of this podcast, and then after that, there will probably be a lot more heavy spoiler stuff going on here. So anyways, I keep getting off track. Let's finally get to Are You Lost? So Are You Lost is essentially Bear Grylls the anime. Like, I can't even really change it in any other way. I mean, it's anime version of Bear Grylls, so naturally it's not just one guy, it's a girl, and it's not just one girl, it's 4 girls, and it's not just 4 girls, it's 4 teenage schoolgirls in their school outfits on a deserted island, somehow with the clothes still on most of the time, I guess. The lead character, Homare, is essentially like I said, Bear Grylls. Like, she's raised by essentially a survival expert in her father. I believe it was her father. And she's the one with all the knowledge, and then you have the other 3, which is a spoiled brat, an athletic girl who's still lazy as fuck, and basically, like, I guess, like, the genius character or something like that. And altogether, like, it doesn't demand too much. It's a 12-minute show. It's not a full length. And realistically speaking, like, it's funny, and then at times it can just be a little boring. Like, it's not terrible. And it's also not going to be great. I think by the time this show is done, and I probably will finish this because it's really, once I'm 3 episodes into a shorter anime, like anything like that's 12 minutes or lower, it's really hard to get me off of it because it's not demanding too much of my time anyway. So as long as it's passable, it's fine. And with this format, I don't think it's going to really go any further with me. I don't think it's going to do anything that's going to make me want to go away from it unless it just randomly kills one of these girls off for no reason. But in terms of what the show has done, it's perfectly fine. Like, if you're okay with it being an anime that's just girls, because a lot of anime seems to go that way, it's no big deal. It's not fussy. It's not actually overly ecchi. It will have the girls often in states of undress, but that's for an obvious reason. You're on a deserted island, and you're not going to want to get your clothes consistently wet because, obviously, in survival, you want to have dry clothes as often as you can. So there's always little bits to it, but they don't use it out of their way to make it like the whole point of the show. It's more Homare and her just sheer like brutality on how she is just so dead center on all these survival tactics. She'll just grab cicadas out of the air and start biting them, ripping their heads off and eating like the little bit of muscle inside and grossing out all the girls. And it's funny, but it's not reinventing anything. It's not over the top. It's not going to be one of my favorites by the end of this. It will probably be in the lower half of all the shows by the time this is done, but I'm still relatively enjoying it. I'm not I'm not hating it. I'm just not 100% in on it. It's just, again, because it's a short, it's just a nice watch. Doesn't demand too much out of me, and I can just kind of sit down and enjoy, have a few laughs here and there, be grossed out by a girl eating bugs all the time, and, you know, all that fun stuff. So that's that. That's all I can really say about that. I don't know if this will be a spoiler kind of show, because I think this anime is not really going to be doing anything too crazy. I'm sure by the end of it, they'll get rescued by the last episode. Maybe they just keep it going. I don't know. But I don't think they're going to do anything too crazy. Next up on the list here, we have, and this is a long-ass title, Do You Like Your Mom? Her normal attack is 2 attacks at full power. This show I actually wanted to drop after the first episode, and because my list got so small right at the beginning. What happens a lot of times is I'll drop shows early because I figure there's going to be more coming. This season has actually been very light for me, at least from what Crunchyroll's offered. So I ended up giving this one a second shot just to see if I could bring it back in. And as it stands right now, this show is borderline hanging in there just because there is one character specifically who is at least keeping my attention. But in for the most part, like, this show is it's I mean, look, I've watched a ton of harem anime, I've watched a ton of ecchi anime, I've watched a ton of comedies, I've watched a lot of stuff that, you know, has never shied away from incest, for example. And that's what this show is kind of doing a little bit here, because, I mean, mom's been naked already twice in this show, and has no problems having her son see this consistently, so. But this time, this show's a little bit is getting a little too weird. So the gist of this show is that it's what you think is your typical isekai, where the guy gets sucked into a game world, although it's not involuntary. He wanted to go into this. So it's almost like it's Log Horizon level stuff, Sword Art Online level stuff. And the catch with this one is that his mom also got brought into this game world with him. So as we find out, the game world is actually designed to get mothers and sons, or mothers and daughters, close together. So mother and child closer together. And he is the son who looks at his mother as being the mom that embarrasses him constantly. And that's precisely what she does so far in this show. To the point that, like, it's ruining his enjoyment of this game world that he has been desperately wanting for so long. And you get the sense that he's not the only one, and it doesn't take very long for there to be a second character to be added in, and that's who we're talking about. I forget her name right now because a lot of names will kind of come in and leave my brain. And also, I'm looking at my anime list for all my shows, and they don't have the characters listed, so I'm like, shit. And I don't really feel like wasting time Googling it right now. But it's the redhead girl that comes in later. She's obviously your tsundere character that goes into it. And she's entertaining. She's probably the one thing that's keeping me relatively intrigued with this show. Also because her situation with her own mother in this game is quite interesting. They've also added another party member who is acting like their merchant, their, like, item holder. And we haven't heard anything about what's going on with her. There's no identity with her. We don't know if she's a child or a mother. I don't know if they've actually said what she is specifically, but there's no relationship to her going on here. So you wonder what's going on with that. That'll probably be a few episodes in once they deal with Redhead's mother right now, because that's where they're at. But the show in itself is, this might be a show that, even though I've brought it back from the dead once, I don't know if it's going to be able to stay alive again. This is a show that, while there are a few jokes here and there that are funny, and I smile a little bit at it, the implied incest in this specific show, because, like I said, I'm not the guy who's immediately going to write off a show because it does that. Because I think in a fantasy land, because this is fiction, this is anime, this is not real, you can suspend your disbelief and just kind of let it go. But in this case, it's an incest that is actually seeming too real, because it is like a son and mother where the mother is constantly embarrassing him, and that is a very realistic relationship. And for it to be almost like half playing the incest card here is almost making it seem a little too real, a little too legitimate, and I'm not sure how I feel about that, because most of the time when anime delves into incest, it's so goddamn over the top that you just know that it's never going to happen anyway, whereas this one's kind of, I'm wondering if they're actually going to take it in a direction where it could end up being real, because there's no speech of the father in this relationship anywhere. So the father, for all we know, could be dead, because as my gimmick is now saying, every time I see an anime, I flip the coin and see if the dead parent comes up on the coin, you know? So you never know. I mean, the concept is kind of neat. The problem, like I said, is the implied incest that seems to be starting to develop is a little much, and the mom character is a little overbearing in the way of, like, I don't like a lot of characters that go darling all the time. So this one's just kind of off-putting a little bit. I'm still hanging in there, and I'm just waiting to see where this first, like, mini arc goes, and then we see from there. So by the time we get to episode 6, where we get to midway point here on the podcast, we might have I'll definitely have a better idea on whether this is going to be a keeper or whether this is something that was just barely hanging on by a thread anyway. But I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say it's trash. I'm just going to sit here and say, well, it's got potential to kind of lean in that direction if it wants to. Next up, we got Dr. Stone, which is the one Crunchyroll has been shoving down our throats since it came out. This is going to be interesting. And the reason I say it's going to be interesting is because anytime Crunchyroll takes a show and plops that on their advertisements as being, this is going to be the big show this season, generally speaking, it sucks. At least for me. I'm more of a niche anime guy. I like my comedies and I like my, like, chill ones. A lot of what Crunchyroll likes to put up is shonen and more the mainstream stuff like Attack on Titan and things like that, and I don't usually get into those. This show, at least at first episode, really got me with the concept. And as every episode has gone by since, I'm not sure how I feel anymore. The gist of the show is that, I guess it's present day when everything happens, this random green light appears, and everybody is turned to stone. And it's almost like you're meant to assume that they're all dead, but in fact, some of them, 3,700 years later, wake up, including that being, of course, our two main characters. Dr. Stone, or in this case Senku, is basically a genius and is, trying to revitalize society and is a master scientist and all these experiments he does. So he's constantly the guy that's trying to essentially, like, almost like play God and defeat nature with his own science and kind of revitalize, kind of jumpstart the human race back to the modern day from when they're now restarting all the way back in their initial days as cavemen. And then you have Taiju, who's just a blubbering idiot, and you love him because he's just that much of a dunce cap. And the way that the show is shaping up so far, I don't know how long this will go for, but they early on have to awaken a man called Tsukasa, which they basically, like, talk as being this, like, primate, like, high school kid who can fight everything. He punches and kills lions when he gets awakened so he can save the two. The problem is that Tsukasa doesn't have the same idea of life that Senku does. Senku wants to cure everybody. Tsukasa wants to basically restart civilization as more of a youth movement because he feels the old guard are the reasons that they were why they were the deplorable society that they had become, at least in his mind. So it's a bit of this interesting clash that they're going for here, and I have no idea if this is going to be something that goes through the entire series. If this is one arc, we don't know. And at this point in time, I was interested in the show, and I'm slowly waning a bit, only because every time I kind of watch shows like this where I see these really elaborate futuristic concepts, I'm afraid of the fact that it'll get dull or it won't be resolved, and I'll get mad because I want to know answers. And this show it's funny, and I am enjoying the main cast for the most part. I just worry the story is going to do something to really turn itself around, and not in a good way. I said this at the Con Bravo panel that I attended. I'm just nervous about that show. And as I stand right now, I'm not 100% confident that this show is going to be what I want it to be by the time we get to episode 6, episode 9, episode 12 or 13. I think this is going to be a double season show, so I don't know how this will go. And I am nervous because it's one of those shows that is making me think, okay, but are they just going to go with the usual mainstream tropes that usually turn me off of these kind of shows, that have turned me off of Attack on Titans and your Yuri on Ices and your Black Clovers and One Punch Mans and Mob Psycho 100 and what's the fuck, My Hero Academia. All these shows, generally speaking, I look at it and be like, that looks kind of interesting, and then after a couple episodes, I'm like, no, this stuff is not written for me at all. And it's okay. If the show ends up being good for a lot of people, that's awesome. It's just in my case, I'm a little bit nervous and unsure whether this is going to have staying power by the end of it. All right, next up, we have Given, which, from looking at the screenshot, when I saw it, or looking at the thumbnail that Crunchyroll put up, I'm thinking, okay, so it's going to be a boy love anime. That didn't take much to figure out. And I've struggled to find boy love anime that I've been able to stick with. I came close with a few, and it's just, what was the one a couple seasons ago? It was the one where it was like a model and actor who was the number one for such a long time, and all of a sudden this new guy comes in and takes the number one spot from him. So he's trying to get back into the hottest, like the number one hottest guy. I can't think of the name of it. I know it started with a D. And that show was really funny early on. But because it got a little too overly sexual, it got to the point where they were rushing that part of it way too much, and they were kind of overdoing it. And it kind of just put me off of it because they kind of took the quirkiness of that relationship away and just kind of, they kind of screwed it up. Super Lovers was a similar way where I was kind of okay with it in the early going, and then it just got fucking uncomfortable and strange. And I was just like, nah. And again, this isn't like an anti-gay thing. I mean, I'm bisexual, for God's sake, so it's not that. The difference that I find is that boy love anime tries to get a little too sloppy, almost. I'm trying to think what word I can use to describe it. I don't know. It's almost like they go a little too hard on the romantic side of it, whereas a lot of like harems is meant in the ridiculousness of it, and that's kind of why I like harems a lot, is because of the sheer insanity and ridiculousness of it. Yeah, is it sexual? Sure, but it's not sexual in the terms of incessant making out and all these, times where they're like naked in bed and all the time. Like, it usually doesn't happen. It's more things like being caught while they're undressing or falling on the guy, and having their breasts up in his face. Like, it's stuff like that that's insanely stupid and would never happen, so you can forego that. Whereas a lot of boy love anime, they try to just really go hard on the making out stuff. And I'm just like, it'd be okay if you did it once in a blue moon, but not every episode. Given is not doing that after 3 episodes. In fact, even though it looks pretty obvious that it's going to end up being a boy love anime, they haven't even thought about the idea of teasing that these two are really into each other. More as like, the main characters just have this weird, quirky relationship between the two, and one of them idolizes one, and the other is just kind of like, what the fuck is with this guy, but why can't I look away from him? So they haven't gone anywhere with that romanticism yet, which means it's been a lot easier for me to get into it without that worry of it getting a little too over the top. But what really has sold me on this show, and I said this on the Con Bravo panel, is that I love the fact that this takes the music, and by music I mean like they're musicians learning their craft, in terms of one main character is already in a band and is very skilled at his craft, the other has never played a guitar in his fucking life, and I'm hearing them play their instruments like someone actually playing their instruments. Take a show like Fuka, which I really, really loved, but Fuka plays one song the entire show. They constantly just keep playing the same riffs, whereas this show has guitars just making sounds, like the guy just plucking the strings for the first time and making like that blank sound of just hitting open strings. The guy just playing random riffs and being really cool about it. It's sounding almost like I'm hearing people actually in a studio playing their instrument and practicing, which is so unusual to me. I don't know if I've ever come across an anime that does that in any aspect, let alone just music-biased anime or music central anime. I don't know if shows like, say, Euphonium or ones like that have done it. I haven't seen them. But in this case, out of all the shows that I've watched that have a central theme around music, rock bands, musicianship, learning an instrument, that kind of stuff, I've never seen it to this extent in terms of how they showcase the audio aspect of it. And because of that, it reminds me of how it was for me growing up playing guitar, and the same going for when I used to teach people how to play. I'm getting a very similar vibe from that, and I love that. It really draws me in a little bit more, which already complements the quirkiness between Mafuyu and Ritsuka. Not to mention, you have the other two band members in Akihiko and Haruki also being their own interesting characters that we haven't quite seen get fleshed out yet. And together, it's created actually this foursome, although specifically Mafuyu and Ritsuka as the duo here that are probably or even inevitably going to fall in love at some point. It's creating this interesting dynamic that I don't tend to see a lot with characters that are becoming romantically involved. It's not a obvious relationship so much as you can see it slowly gaining steam, whereas a lot of the time, especially like in harems, and I'll give harems crap for this all the time, harems make it pretty obvious when the girl's suddenly in love with the guy, and it's usually for a stupid reason, but it's so plainly obvious that you know there's no disputing it anymore, whereas I'm not 100% sure if these guys even feel anything for each other beyond just interest in what the other does. So when it eventually does come out, you know it's going to have been a long, drawn-out thing. So I'm just really interested in how that goes. This is probably my favorite show right now, just because it's so interesting to me from a musical aspect and does something that I'm not normally used to seeing in anime. So I'm definitely going to keep an eye out for that one. Next one up, another long-ass title. If it's for my daughter, I'd even defeat a demon lord. I have heard some very, very bad things about where this anime is going to go, but for the first 3 episodes, I am adoring the show. Long story short, a high-rank adventurer, it would appear, goes out into a forest on some sort of mission and finds, I think, if I remember correctly, he found a corpse and then found this really young devil girl who I guess is like this race of, well, I mean, it's devil's in the name, so it's kind of looked at a race like evil beings that don't get along in the human world very well. But he takes a shine to this girl and takes her back to the town with him. And when he realizes there's nowhere for her to go, he decides, you know what, fuck it, I'll take her in and adopt her. And he goes from being this cold-hearted, almost adventurer to, you know, she's daddy's little girl, and he is absolutely in love with her and would kill anyone who tried to do anything to her. And this show, at least at this point in time in the show, and I've heard things, and I don't want to get into it here because it's not the time, and it may not even happen in the anime because the anime may not get far enough to catch up with where the manga is, apparently. But as we stand 3 episodes in, this show is adorable as all hell. And as much as I have heard the things that kind of worry me on the direction that the show goes, I can't turn away from this now because I'm so in. Latina, which is the little devil girl, is the cutest fucking thing that I have seen this season. She reminds me a lot of Tsumugi from Sweetness and Lightning. Very much in that aspect. And I can't turn away, which makes me worry of what's going to happen inevitably. But for the time being, it's fantastic. Dale, who is the father, is a bit of an annoying prick. Although I think it's meant to be like that. It's meant to be like he's the overprotective father. You're not there to see Dale. You're there to see Latina. And the other character who has kind of almost ended up like acting as an Uncle Gregor has actually been the better character between the two guys. But it's just it's an interesting show that I never would have thought about in terms of what is a weird fantasy adventurer but slice of life at the same time. It's kind of a nice mix. Hopefully, based on what I've heard the manga does, they don't go that direction. If they do, and it happens to be during the anime, well, you'll hear it from me because I won't be fucking happy about it. But for the time being, 3 episodes in, I fucking love this show. I adore the show. It's a nice little thing to put on in the background and turn my brain off. Now I'm 1 episode further in. I'm in episode 4. Episode 4 is a little more testing, but it's still good. It's still good. I'm a little worried already, but we'll see what happens when we get to the halfway point on the next version of this podcast. Next up, Isekai Cheat Magician. This show is okay, I guess. It hasn't really done anything yet. Standard shit. Guy gets teleported into a fantasy world. This time his best friend, who is female, comes with him, and they're both off the charts capable of casting magic. Nothing's really happened at this point. The first 3 episodes have kind of just been them training and kind of getting accustomed to the world. We haven't really seen anything come out of it thus far. So I don't really have much to comment on this. And it's why I'm saying it's okay, because I don't really know what they're doing with it yet. They haven't really introduced too much else. I mean, they've done one little mission, but it wasn't really anything. Some of the other side characters so far have been okay. The elf girl is fine. I mean, it's your typical, like, stoic elf girl that, you know, eventually they crack a little bit and she kind of opens up a bit. Then you got your sultry magician girl with black hair, and literally the first time you see her, she's in her underwear. Although she had a good point. The elf girl opens the door and sees this black-haired girl in her underwear and be like, "What are you doing? That's freaking lecherous." And she's like, "It's my fucking house. I can do what I want." I mean, she didn't say that verbatim, but she basically said, "It's my fucking house. I can wear what I want in here." To which, as a guy who likes adopting the no pants rule in his own apartment, I can fully agree with that. But like I said, I don't really have much to talk about with this show because it hasn't really gone anywhere yet. Although I will say, the opening for this show is done by Myth and Roid, and Myth and Roid is usually a band or an act that I will love everything they put out. They found one that sucks. I don't like this one. It sounds like garbage. It sounds like over-the-top, synthesized garbage. Sorry, Myth and Roid, but you fucked up finally. Now I just gotta wait for Claris somehow to hit that, and I don't know if Claris is capable of doing that. But it is what it is. 2 more left. Second season of Danmachi, or in full, Is It Wrong That I Want to Meet... Oh no, that's not the correct term. Isn't it, Is It Wrong That I Want to Pick Up Girls in a Dungeon? But I think they're showing it right now that it's Is It Wrong That I Want to Meet You in a Dungeon? I don't think that was the original title, so unless they changed it for this season... But either way, like, you get the gist of it. Is It Wrong to Pick Up Girls in a Dungeon is basically what it is. For those who have never heard the series before, you will obviously go into this a little bit cold. The gist of this show so far, up to where it stands, is that it's fantasy world. It's not an isekai. It is just its own fantasy world. It's almost like a dungeon crawler RPG system. They have this gigantic dungeon that has all these levels of floors. They have ranks for magicians, although levels is not nearly as high as you think. Like, as far as I know, I think the highest level I think we've ever seen is like 6 or 7. There's no, like, level 50s in this as far as we've seen. So somebody going up from level 1 to level 2 is like graduating high school, it almost seems. So it's a pretty big deal. But the gist of the show has always been there's a set of families. It's almost like clans in a way. And the main family is literally 2 characters. It's Belle, who is the one member of this familia of the goddess Hestia, and that's just the 2 of them. And the entire first season, honestly, was really just him learning to adventure and actually becoming one. This season, after he's met a whole bunch of people, and I fucking love this show. I play the mobile game. I actually said at one point to friends who are also in anime, if there has ever been a show that has more characters that I have fallen in love with, this is the show. I could probably put out 20 characters right now that I am totally in on. And it keeps growing. But this second season is now revolving around, at least at the time being, this new familia that we haven't seen before with a god that is very obsessive with keeping people that he's attracted to as pets almost. And he's trying to take Belle because, you know, there's already been one goddess who wants I don't know if Freya wants to fuck him or if she just likes having playthings that she can look at. I don't know how it is with her. Apollo, I think, wants to, like, tongue Belle's ass, and it's creepy as shit. He's almost like Kefka, but if Kefka didn't want to destroy the world, he just wanted to fuck it. That seems to be what Apollo is, and I kind of like that, and I'm also creeped out by it at the same time. But so far, 3 episodes in, I'm mixed with this season, because I feel like they try to do a lot really quick. They brought in Apollo right away. They've already started a war game, which is a gigantic battle. That is, the stakes are high, so we might already be getting the end of this little arc right at the start, which seems weird. There's a lot of adversity early on. Belle gets his fucking shit pushed in early on in this season. and one of the other side characters immediately gets whisked away, and that gets resolved really quickly. The show is seemingly rushing a lot here so far, and I don't think I'll ever drop this series, because once I get to a second season of something, it's pretty hard to get me off of it. But I've been disappointed so far with this season. I'm actually not that happy with it. I'm not, like, mad at it so much as I'm just like, man, like, you're not starting out of the gate very well. But as it stands, I'm still enjoying the bits of it that are going on. But man, I thought I was going to be really into this, and they haven't really grabbed me yet. But we'll see what happens as we get to later episodes. And then last but not least is our second short, and that's Magical Senpai. And I will fully admit that this show is just a dumb fucking comedy, and I like putting it on because it's dumb as fuck. That's all it is. Long story short, it's two people. It's Senpai and Assistant. That's their names at this point. Senpai is a girl who really loves Magician and is fucking trash at it. So trash that usually her doing any tricks revolves in one of three things. She either damages property, hurts herself, or makes her clothes fall off in some aspect. And, you know, the other guy who is Assistant, who is actually somewhat okay at magic, seems to have some interest in it, just not around her, but it feels like he just kind of sticks around with her because he feels sorry for her because it looks like she's the girl that has no friends kind of deal. In terms of, it's a short, is it 12 minutes or is it shorter than that? I can't remember right now, but I think it's 12. It's just a short comedy. It doesn't demand too much out of you. If you have a problem with excessive ecchi, this show kind of does it because she's got the gigantic breasts. She falls over constantly. You get panty shots once in a while. The comedy aspect is saving it for me, but I've had a couple of occasions watching the show where I'm just like, ooh, this is not quite going that well. It's funny enough that I'm still like having fun with it, and then I'm watching it being like, this isn't that great. But I mean, all in all, I'm still somewhat enjoying it. I just wish I want them to introduce more characters, because I look at the screenshot, there are 5 people on the cover, and I don't think we've seen any of the other 3 at this point. So I want to see more. And 3 episodes in, we kind of should have seen at least one more by now, because these two can only go for so long, especially when there's not too much of their characters. You need somebody else to really complete the triangle and eventually what ends up being a square and a hexagon as we go. But as of right now, it's not offensively bad. I'm waiting for it to kind of up the ante and at least get a little bit more in there. But that's what it is going on so far. So that's everything I have. That's all 8 shows that I'm watching, and I just finally put Audacity back on to see what I'm at time-wise, and it's almost 40 minutes. I did not think it was going to go that long. But as we get to next week, it could be less shows by the time. I mean, I'm going to tell you all 8 shows, but if I drop anything in the episodes of 4 to 6, I'll let you guys know. We might get a little bit more substance out of these podcasts because I'll be able to just completely talk about spoilers. But again, that's going to be what it is for the time being. So I hope you guys enjoyed the first try on this. I'm going to be trying to do this from now on. I don't know if I'll be able to do it every 3 weeks perfectly. It depends on how my schedule works out. I'm doing this on Thursday night, which I'm barely making time for. Like, pretty much as soon as I turn this off, I'm rushing out the door to go do some other stuff. So that being said, guys, so if you want to see more anime content, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stuff. If you got stuff that you guys want to talk about in the comments, whether it's your opinions on the 8 shows that I've reviewed or stuff that you've watched, don't hesitate to put those in the comments below. Also, don't forget to share this with all your friends who are obviously big weebs like the rest of us. And with that being said, guys, thanks for watching, and I will see you on the next episode, which is in 3 weeks, or I'll see you on the next video that I post up on the channel. So, enjoy the rest of your night, or day, depending on when you're watching this. I don't know why I always revert to night, because that's where I am, but you know. I just assume that time is linear to how I'm listening to it. You guys are somehow psychically listening to what I'm doing. But anyways, as I ramble on towards the end and this thing never finishes, I might as well do that now. So again, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.